Lieutenant General Leroy Manor is a combat veteran of World War II and the Vietnam War. He is best known for commanding the Special Operations Joint Task Force responsible for the Son Tay POW raid in North Vietnam in 1970. Manor was born in Morrisville, New York on 21 February 1921. He entered cadet aviation training following the outbreak of World War II, graduating in 1943 with his pilot wings and a commission in the U.S. Army Air Force. During World War II, Manor flew 72 combat missions in the P-47 over Europe. He flew another 275 combat missions in the F-100 as commander of the 37th Tactical Fighter Wing during the Vietnam War. In August 1970, 6 months after assuming command of the new Air Force Special Operations Force, Manor was given command of a Special Operations Joint Task Force charged with conducting Operation Kingpin, the rescue of American prisoners from the Son Tay POW camp located 22 miles northwest of Hanoi. On 21 November 1970, 28 aircraft and 56 Army troops conducted the raid on Son Tay in just 26 minutes, suffering only 2 injuries despite facing an enemy force of over 12,000 troops within 5 miles. No POWs were rescued since they had been secretly moved to Hanoi, but the raid was considered an operational planning and tactical success and established the standards for rehearsing, organizing, and executing missions still used by Special Operation Task Forces to this day. Manor concluded his Air Force career as commander of 13th Air Force and Chief of Staff Pacific Command and was inducted into the Air Commando Hall of Fame in 1994. Air Command and Staff College is proud to honor General Leroy Manor as an Eagle.
General Manor, on behalf of ACSC, thank you for being here today to share your experiences and life lessons with us.
It's great to spend the week here, and I'm really impressed with what has happened in the last few days, and will continue through tomorrow. And I'm impressed with the educational projects that take place here. And I've always liked Maxwell. You know that this was the first base that I came to when I enlisted in 1942. I came here to Maxwell, and it was a pre-flight training in the aviation cadets. And I've been back since then at various times. But at this time, and being an Eagle, to being recognized as an Eagle, is one of the great events of my life. Thank you.
General, I'd actually like to start back in 1942 with the outbreak of World War II. You were a school teacher in upstate New York. Can you talk to us a little bit about your effort to get on to active duty during the war and how you ultimately became a pilot?
Yes, I'll be glad to make a comment, and there's quite a bit to it. I'll keep it short. Try not to bore you with those details. Incidentally, can you hear me all through the room here?
Gotcha.
Okay, I always ask that because one time I was just starting a lecture, and someone got up in the back, and said, "Hey, we can't hear you back here." Somebody in the front row got up and said, "I can hear very well up here. I'll trade places with you." So I always want to make sure that I can be heard. Well, to go back to when I enlisted, I'll just say a few words about it, but it was a very difficult thing to do. I've always been interested in flying, and I had sort of prepared for it in that I had received my flying license prior to this time that I'm going to tell you about. So I already am a pilot. I've got my rating. But I wanted to become an aviation cadet and fly for the Army. We didn't have an Air Force then. We had Army Air Corps. And so Pearl Harbor came along, and that gave a boost to my desires. Because there was a need, there was an increasing need for pilots. I believed anyway, and I was sure that was true. So with other people that I had gone to school with, I I went to Governor's Island in New York, which was a recruiting place for primarily, I guess, for aviation cadets. And they looked at my record and so forth, and I had indicated that I was married. I was only 19 when I got married. I just left college then, and I was teaching school. Same school I went to in the grades, one-room school. I was a school principal. I was the only one there. But they looked at that and they said, "We're not taking married men for aviation cadet training." Sorry, but so I went back home. But I didn't forget it, and so I kept thinking about, gee, there's got to be some way that we can manage this, and there didn't seem to be any. So I said, well, I'll go to Canada. I knew there some friends of mine had gone to Canada because for some reason they couldn't get in the U.S. And I took their exam, and they said, "You're accepted, and you're ready to go tomorrow." I said, "Well, right now I'm just up here to get all the information I can on it, and I do want to go, but I've got a contract that was hard to get because it was hard to get a job in those days, and I'd gotten a job to teach in this one-room school." And I said, "I've finished my contract, and then I'll come back and do that." They said, fine, whenever it's convenient for you, do it. So I came back to finish my work. In the meantime, the Army changed their rules, and they opened it up for married men. I said, boy, that's what I want. That's what I want. In the U.S. Air Corps, Army Air Corps. So, well, I don't want to go back to Governor's Island so quickly. But there was one in Albany, University. I went there. And being married didn't matter. Took all the tests, ready to go. But I had to meet a board. And in meeting the board, and they questioned me why I wanted to go and so forth. You're married. You won't have to go. And that's dangerous business. And so anyway, they wouldn't accept me. Well, that was very disappointing. Oh, they asked me what my classification was for the draft, and I said I have not yet been classified, but I will be soon. Well, you don't have to worry about it. You'll be 3A. Anyway, so I didn't like their advice, and incidentally, I had discussed this project with my wife, and I must tell you now that I probably wouldn't have had today the career that I was able to generate at that time because my wife was very supportive, and without her I would not have been able to reach what I did. Her reaction was, "Roy, if that's something you want to do it." And throughout, that's the way it worked out. Wonderful. We were together for 72 years. So, okay, I said the first thing I thought of then was the draft board. On my way home from school one day, I decided to stop in at the draft board. And luckily, it was in the late afternoon anyway, and the man who was in charge there was someone that I had known and I knew. And I said, Bob, I need to know, I'd like to know, when you're going to classify the group that I'm with. And he said, we're working on that right now. He said, but you don't have anything to worry about. You're married, so you'll get 3A. I said, that's not what I want. What do you mean? I said, I need 1A. I need 1A. That's the only way that I can think of right now that I can enlist in the aviation cadets. He said, well, if that's what you want, I can get your card out right now and stamp it 1A. I said, please do. And he did. And so as soon as I could work it in, I wanted to go to a recruiting station again. But I didn't want to go back to Albany because I had just been there a short time ago. So I went to Winooski, Vermont, 40th and Allen. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Anyway, I don't know if it's still active or not. It was an army. They were all army places then. And I was accepted, and I went in. And this was on June the 8th of 1942. And they said, go home, and as soon as we get an opening in our training setup, we'll let you know. So I went back, and, boy, the world opened up. I was real happy. I've got it made. And on the 19th of November, I had to report back. I got notices during that period. I was to report back, and I was ready to go.
Sir, fast forwarding a little bit to June 6th of 1944, you found yourself in a P-47 over Normandy during the D-Day invasion. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
That was, it was
June 6th of 1944?
The invasion.
Yes, sir.
Oh. Well, anyway, from the time that I enlisted, I went through training and so forth, got my wings, and checked out in the P-47. I went to Europe, and I joined the 8th Air Force, 358th Fighter Wing, 8th Air Force, and we flew missions against to support the bombers on their missions to bomb targets in Berlin and other places in Germany. This was all at high altitude. And then the thought was being given to the invasion of Normandy, which of course I didn't know that. I was just a pilot. I was a lieutenant and enjoying it. I mean, I was enjoying flying. I always did. And on June, the invasion was planned for June the 5th. And we had to paint stripes around our airplane on the night of June 4th. Any airplane that didn't have those stripes around them could be shot down. Well, we were scheduled to do patrolling over the beach during the invasion. But the weather turned bad, and Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, who's the overall commander, had a decision to make, and he decided to delay it one day because of the weather. So we went on June the 6th, early in the morning, and my squadron provided, with other squadrons also, provided cover over the area. We didn't carry any bombs. Of course, we had 850 caliber machine guns, but we weren't there to attack targets on the ground because of all the action that was going to take place on the ground. It would have been dangerous for us to try to find a German target to hit. Anyway, that wasn't part of our mission. But since we weren't carrying any bombs, we had additional time for fuel so we could stay there longer. The weather was pretty good. A little bit, there were some clouds, broken clouds, but there were a lot of openings also. And we got there right at daylight. And just before daylight, the paratroopers came in. And they came in out of C-47s and dropped in that area. Then the gliders came in. We were there primarily to protect the gliders against any attack by hostile aircraft. And it was real interesting. Well, the whole thing was very interesting. But it was interesting to see these, maybe I can say hundreds of gliders being towed by C-47s coming in, and we were just circling over them and around them. And then you see the gliders being unhooked and then landing in these small fields in Normandy. Normandy is an agricultural area, and the fields are small and all surrounded by trees and hedgerows. And it was really, I can still see that picture in my mind of these gliders coming in and see some. They would land, but they couldn't stop. They would hit a hedgerow and go through it. The wings would come off and stay on this side. then you'd see them on the other side of the hedgerow with men getting out. And gee, it was obvious in my thought that some of them must be injured going through that kind of a landing. But anyway, that's how some of our ground troops, many of our ground troops, got into Normandy. And then as we circled, then we saw the troops coming in off the landing craft, the water. And, you know, it seemed like hundreds, and it was, hundreds of men coming across. And this was true at different beaches. I know some of you may have been to Normandy. You've seen where the different beaches are and so forth. It was a big day. And I guess I didn't realize it then, but it was a historical day. History was made there. And it took a while before the success could be established. Although it was established that we had made that we could stay there at this time, but we didn't go very far. And it was about 2 months before we broke through what they call the St. Lo breakthrough, and then we moved down the Cherbourg Peninsula. But it was about 2 months, so we had a lot of work to do before we could get there, and the losses were heavy. The losses were very heavy. I've seen the figures. I don't have them on the top of my mind, but it was in the thousands. It was a very costly operation. But have you ever thought of what the world might be like today if we had not done this? I think it would be a lot different. All of Europe except England had been taken over by Hitler's forces. Now, what were we doing after the invasion? Well, in a few days we were landing on the beach. The engineers had designed some places with steel planking where we could land our P-47s, so we could take off from our base in England, fly a mission, and hit ground targets that our ground forces wanted us to hit, and then land, and refuel, rearm, and go on another mission. And then when we finished that second one, we'd go home back to England and ready to fly the next day. Well, during that period, we were also on some days flying missions again to support the bombers going across at high altitude going across Germany. Or we were hitting targets in the Pas-de-Calais area. The Pas-de-Calais area is across from the British Channel where the narrowest part is. And the Germans thought that we were going to make a landing, an invasion from that area because it was so much shorter. It was a long ways for the boats to go down to the Cherbourg Peninsula. However, because of the way it was set up, with the Germans had some panzer divisions in the Pas-de-Calais area, which, as I say, was across with that narrow part. And we were given targets to hit there, or we were hitting bridges to prevent them from moving. It was trying to keep them there so they wouldn't move down to where the beachhead was and defend the positions there. We wanted to bottle those panzer divisions where they were. So on July 4th.
Yes, sir.
Can I proceed to that?
Yes, sir. Definitely.
On July 4th, I was on a mission to bomb a bridge. There were 12 of us in this formation. Today, you'd probably do with just one airplane or two, but we used 12 that day, and we got the bridge. But I didn't participate I didn't drop any bombs on it because before we got there, and we were flying a little bit lower than we normally would have been flying because of the cloud cover, and we had to find this bridge on the Seine River, northwest of Paris, and I got a direct hit from an 88 millimeter anti-aircraft gun, and it pretty much destroyed my airplane. my instruments were all shot out. My oxygen was shot out. My radio was shot out. I didn't have anything left really to do with, except my engine kept running. But then my cockpit filled with smoke, and I thought, where there's smoke, there's fire. I've got to be ready to get out of this thing. So I'll open the canopy. I tried to open the canopy and I couldn't do it because flak had hit the rails on which the canopy slid back, and I couldn't budge it. And boy, I thought, if I'm on fire, this is this is not a good place to be. But there were plenty of holes in the cover of the canopy, so forth. And so eventually the smoke cleared, and the engine kept running. Now, as I say, I had no instruments, but I said, I'd better go home if I can. So I left the formation and started for home. My wingman came with me. And the engine kept running all the way to my home base at High Halton in England, which was southeast of London. And I landed, and well, I might point out before, way before I landed, I was bleeding pretty badly because I had been hit too, and there was a little medical aid thing on my parachute. I took it out, and there was something that I could bound around my arm here and stop the bleeding out of my sleeve, and so anyway, I got back. When I landed, I had a tire that had blown out because flak had hit the tire. The wheels were tucked under, and hit the tire, so I had a flat tire. But anyway, I got to where I could park on my home field, High Halton. And of course, the emergency people came over and so forth, and they pried the canopy open, and so I was able to get out and off to a field hospital. I was in the hospital for about 4 weeks. And then I was able to get back to my airplane. Now, I'll say another word about that airplane. In those days, we painted things on the airplane. Most of them had beautiful girls painted on the airplane and so forth. I didn't do that, but I had my wife's name painted across the canopy. Not the canopy, the shroud over the engine. And it was Dolores. And Dolores never flew again because it was not repairable to fly again, and luckily I was.
Yes, sir.
So I went back to flying. The breakthrough was made, and the move across France was accomplished. We supported Patton, General Patton and his army. You've probably all seen the movie of Patton. It was a good movie. And with the Normandy landing turned out to be very successful.
So I'd like to fast forward 26 years now.
Sure.
I'd like to fast forward 26 years to when you were a brigadier general, and you received a phone call from the Pentagon in August of 1970 telling you to come up for a secret mission, the Santé raid.
Oh, you want to talk Santé now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, let me just say a little bit more word about it.
Sure.
We crossed Germany. We were held up at the German border. I ended up in Metz, France, and this was just before the Battle of the Bulge started. You've all read about the Battle of the Bulge, I'm sure. Then the breakthrough was made across the German lines. I ended up in Nuremberg, where the trials later came on in Germany, and that's where when the war ended. There was on May the 8th of 1945, and then we my unit was assigned to go to the Pacific, but it took some time to get it ready, and it was 2 or 3 months anyway. The war in the Pacific didn't end until August the 15th, and on August the 15th, I happened to be in London, and but there was dancing in the streets all night long, and it was really a big day. Now the war in Europe was over. The war in the Pacific was over, and we were scheduled to board our boats and the boat to go to the Pacific in Nice, France, in the southern part on the Mediterranean Sea. And rather than go over there, we came to New York, and I came home. And so I was there about almost 2 years. And now we go. What was the point?
And now we'll jump forward 26 years, sir, to August of 1970, when you got a phone call to come up to the Pentagon for the Sante raid.
Now we're going to move to Southeast Asia in 1970. But I've got to say a word or two about before that. I had several assignments before that turned out to be in fighters, which was good. I had a fighter wing in Vietnam, and I had a great fighter wing. I had Phuket, and I had 5 squadrons on the wing. One of them was a National Guard squadron from Sioux City, Iowa. One was the Misty Squadron, which was a forward air controllers in the north. Our work was all in the south, but it was particularly good because I like to fly, and there I could fly as much as I wanted. I was the commander of the wing, and and so I did get a lot of flying in. I think it was 275 missions, so that was good. I came back from there, and I went to McConnell Air Force Base and flew the 105s there, and then I got promoted to Brigadier General, and I was moved to the commander of the Special Operations Force at Eglin, and Hurlburt. Some of you have been at Hurlburt. You've been at Hurlburt, and it was one of my bases. A great assignment, even though in those days the Special Forces didn't have the knowledge. They had the knowledge. They weren't as considered a great force as they are today, but they still did a great job, and they did it well. Anyway, that's the job I had, was to train that, to help to train that unit, and it was a good assignment. I got a call one day, it was on a Saturday, to go to Washington, to be there on Monday. I had an appointment with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who I had not met. His name was Moorer. He was in the Navy, but he was the chief chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Each of the services had chiefs there: the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The Marines didn't have one then. They do now, but they didn't then. I didn't know why that was. My boss, who was at Langley, General Momeyer, called me, and he said, "Did you get a call from the Pentagon?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And I said, "What is it all about?" He said that I don't know. So it was a mystery to me over the weekend. I got another call. It said I had an airplane, a T-39, in the job that I had. I could take off anytime I wanted to go, which was often. And I was asked to stop at Fort Bragg. The landing there was to be at Pope Field, Pope Air Force Base, to pick up an Army colonel. And so I did, and I picked him up the first time I met him. Bull
Simons?
Bull Simons, Colonel Bull Simons, Arthur D. Simons. And he had been called also. And he didn't know why either. So we had dinner together at the Andrews Club that night, and we wondered, what in the world is... And we came to the conclusion it must be some kind of a study. And, it's something that we didn't care much to do. Because he was happy with what he was doing, I was happy with what I was doing. And who knows, it probably will have to be somewhere for 4 or 5 months working on a study of some kind that will probably not go anywhere anyway. And we liked what we were doing. So we had a contact to meet there, and we met the contact. And we were then ushered into the chairman's office. Real nice person, Admiral Moore. I got to know him fairly well at later times. And we were there just a short time. It wasn't a long meeting. And basically what he said was, we have a reason to believe that we could do something for our POWs. That's a bad situation for POWs in Vietnam. There were over 500 Americans. Former commander of this university was one of the POWs. Anyway, he said, we'd like to do something for them. And then there were the main prisons, Halo and Kulak, were in downtown Hanoi. That's where the bulk of them were. But there were others in smaller POW camps surrounding. And they had done, some studies had been done on it, and they had come up with one at Phuket. Phuket? Not Phuket. Sante. At Sante, and it seemed like that one was a logical one to study further, and he said if we could land there with a force to show them that we have some concern we had a lot of concern for the POWs, and the morale must be terrible in those places. They must have given up hope that we're going to get them back somehow to their home. And of course that was true. So if we could just land there and do something there, the word would spread, and all of them, even those at Halo and Kulak, would get the news that we're concerned. The country has not forgotten them. If possible, we could bring those that are in the camp where we stopped, where we raided, and that would be real good too, to bring them home. And he said, what we'd like for you to do, if you'll agree to do it. In other words, we weren't directed to do this. We were asked if we would. And boy, that sounded great to us. I had a lot of friends who were POWs, and I felt badly for them. And so did Simon. We all did. I think the country did. Certainly the families did. And so we agreed to do it. He said, come back and tell us whether or not you can do it. And if you can, tell us when you would do it. And we were excused. Shall I continue?
Yes, sir.
So we came out of there, scratching our heads, and we made a few thoughts right then. Certainly we're going to do it. And we're going to move on this as fast as we can. It's going to be highly classified. It's going to be Army and Air Force. It's going to be joint. And they intended it for it to be joint because Bull Simons was Army, I was Air Force. I don't know why we were selected, but anyway, we were happy to have been selected to do that. So the first thing for us to do was to establish some planning. We had to do some planning. And we got some guidance from the people who worked at a section called SACSA, Special Assistance for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. And I'll think in a moment or two, the man in charge of that, he was very helpful. He was a brigadier general, and he had been in special ops for a long time. Anyway, we set up this planning group, bringing in people who we happen to know as planners, the Army, Air Force, a couple civilians, and they were, of course, not given much information initially. And we checked them out to make sure that the people that we could trust with secrets, we were given a secured place in the Pentagon where we could work. And that progressed real well. We made contacts with each of the intelligence agencies in the Washington area. And at each of those agencies, we were able to establish one point of contact, just one person, and only that person would know what we're talking about. He would gather information, but none of the rest. In the Washington area particularly, I think secrets are hard to hold. But if we didn't have a secret of what we were doing, and the enemy learned that we were planning to do something like this, it could be a disaster. And we had to avoid that at any cost. Okay, next thing we decided that everyone who participates on this, Army and Air Force members, would be volunteers. So Simons went to Fort Bragg to seek volunteers. I went back home to the Air Force, and we decided on airplanes. Many of these decisions we made early, and we didn't have to change them. We had 5 HH-53s. We were going to take the force there in 53s, HH-50 helicopters. That was a big helicopter, replaced by another airplane today flown by this gentleman.
CV-22.
The CV-22,
Sir.
yeah, it's a great airplane. And it has taken the place of the helicopters, of the HH-53. And one HH-3, that's a smaller one. Well, we couldn't land in the prison compound with a 53. It was too big. But we could land with a smaller helicopter, which we had, with the HH-3. Anyway, we got the forces together from those helicopters and brought them in. I gave them the same information that was given to the people at Fort Bragg, which was that we were working on a humanitarian assignment, a very important one. We couldn't tell them much more about it than that. Do you want to participate? If you want to participate, you stay here and we'll go further. If not, you can leave. Now, nobody left. Now, in the Fort Bragg situation, finally there were something like 500 that gathered in a room, probably something like this, and they were all interviewed, and out of that group, 100 were selected. Okay, back to airplanes. In addition to the helicopters, we want some cover for them. Well, in our unit right there on Hurlburt were some A1s. Well, we didn't have the gunships today that we had then. We probably would have used gunships. Anyway, the A1 can carry good fuel, a good bomb load, bombs under the wings, and it had good endurance, could carry plenty of fuel. So we got them on board, got those pilots in. Pilots with a great deal of experience right there at Hurlburt. We needed some special C-130s, Combat Talon C-130s. And I had 4 in my unit. There were 4 in Germany. There were 4 in the Philippines. I mean, in Asia, in Taiwan, not Taiwan, Vietnam. Anyway, they were in the Pacific area. We needed 2. We always have some redundancy, some need for redundancy. We had redundancy in airlift, and as far as bringing POWs out with our helicopters. Except for the HH-3, we weren't going to bring it back. We decided that we wouldn't do that. So we had our force ready. We wanted to integrate the Army people and the Air Force people. Now today, that works in an entirely different way. But it was all separate then. In each of the services, they weren't working together very much, except on an occasional exercise. So the Army people were brought to a field right near, what's the name of the piece? Right near Eglin. The Eglin is a wide area, it's a big area. Some of you know that. Some of you have been there. And we could train there without making a big fuss about it, without making it known public. We could secure some places in the in the wooded areas around there and do whatever training we needed to do. And we did that.
Sir, with the time we have left, I'd like to move forward just a little bit. We're starting to run out of time a little bit.
I will bring that back.
So if we can move forward to the execution of the raid. So you guys trained and then briefed the Secretary of Defense.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're moving way. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Time doesn't allow to go in the detail that I'm going in here. But anyway, it worked out well. It worked out well. So we on the I think it was the 14th of September. It was on the 8th of August that we got the mission. We went back to the Pentagon and briefed the chairman and the other chiefs. It can be done. We can do it, and we want to do it in September. No, that's not right. We want to do it in October 21st. October 21st, we were going to do this at night, in the middle of the night. It had the moon structure that we wanted as far as the amount of light that we could cope with on the ground. Not completely dark, some light, but not a full moon either. And it would happen between the 20th and the 25th of September. Anyway, our briefing went well with the group at the Joint Staff. They approved it. Incidentally, I also briefed that we wouldn't bring back a helicopter. We'd leave it there. We'd destroy it before we left. No problem. They didn't say a word about it. But they said, we haven't got the authority to give you that clearance now. It has to go to the Secretary of Defense, and it has to go to the President. Well, to make this shorter, we went as soon as we could. We briefed the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Mel Laird, and he accepted our briefing. He says, that sounds good. He said, but I don't have the authority to give you the final approval. It has to go to the White House. So it was some time before we could go and brief at the White House, but we did. The President was out of town. Kissinger and an Army general, can't think of his name right now, it was his aide, and they accepted the briefing, and they had some questions, but they thought we had a good plan, and they said, I'm going to get to the President on this to get his clearance as quickly as I can, but he said it'll take some time. How soon must you have a decision in order to make your schedule? I said, I've got to have it by tomorrow night. He said, I can't do it by tomorrow night. And so we discussed that. And I couldn't let it go any further because we were all still at Eglin. We had to move this force to Thailand. We were going to take it to a base in Thailand. It would take some time. But we had an alternate date. The alternate date was the same time in November, and the 20th to the 25th. We can cope with that. Except, what concerned me is this is another 30 days of possibility that the information would get out to the North Vietnamese and put us in a bad situation. And if we knew that they knew, then we wouldn't go. We've got to have that knowledge that it's secret, because all we're taking in there, we determined then that we didn't need 100 men. We need Simons is the one. He was the Army expert on this, and he determined that's what they needed to do that job. So we had no choice. We made some additional training and produced some additional equipment that would help us and so forth. And so we made good use of that 30 days. Our planning was completed in the Pentagon. We didn't disband it all, but we moved that unit to my headquarters at Eglin. Not the entire group, just a portion of it that we still needed to do some planning on, and the other one was finished. Next, I needed some airlift to move that force to. Well, before that, Simons and I made a trip to Thailand. To Vietnam, and we briefed the the general there who was the commander of, I've forgotten his name already.
General Abrams, sir. General Abrams.
General Abrams. And we briefed him on what we were doing. He didn't know anything about it. And it was, he had been told by the chairman on a message that we were coming to give him an important briefing. I went through the briefing on what we were there to do and when we were going to do it and how we were going to do it. And I said, do you have any questions? He just sat there smoking a big cigar. And I thought, here we are bringing a force in from the outside into his area. He's the theater commander. And there's no, we didn't know how he would take it. So I said, sir, this is what we plan to do and how we plan to do it. Do you have any questions? He says, yes, I've got a question. Who are you working for when you do this? I was working for the Secretary of Defense and the President. It's been approved by the President. He said, I've only got one statement. Not a question, just a statement. Anything that you need that I have here, forces or whatever, that you need to help the success of this is yours. Well, we didn't need that, but we needed some help from as far as the air was concerned. And the Colonel, or rather General Lou Clay, Air Force, I knew him, was also in that briefing, just the two of them and us. And he said, I presume that applies to you, Lou? And he said, yes, it does. So gee, we had all the help. It was great. Anyway, then we went out to the ship and talked to the commander of the fleet, the Navy, U.S. Navy, and briefed him on what we were doing. And we said, we'd like to have your help to put a feint attack toward Saigon on the night that we do this. He said, I'll do it. And he launched 60 sorties that night from his carriers to do that.
General, we have about 5 minutes left, sir. When we spoke about the mission, you mentioned that after they started execution and Bull Simons reported that there are no POWs, you were out on Monkey Mountain, and initially it was kind of a shock. But in later years, you determined that the mission was a success due to its importance to the POWs in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Can you speak just for a minute on that for the
and that's all the time we have.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so we have to move the force from here to Thailand, and at an air base in Thailand, where Secret Service had an area there that we could take, which was a good place for non-intelligence to leak, and we launched out of Udorn in northern Thailand, and all went well on the launch. And in our training, one thing that I had stressed, we've got checkpoints as we go along, and I want to be able to measure that checkpoint not in minutes, in seconds. I want this to be really on time all the way, and that worked. But that was the discipline that we had going in there with all the helicopters and all the aircraft that I've mentioned already, and I can't give you any details on what happened. We haven't got time to do that, but it went well on the ground. Except in my command post at Monkey Mountain, I was watching this. I had communications with everything that was going on. I had communications with Washington and communications with the Navy that was providing support, and communications with some aircraft that are gathering intelligence and supporting us, the aircraft from Strategic Air Command. This was a big operation. And as a matter of fact, we had 117 airplanes from, 136 airplanes from 17 airfields and aircraft carriers that took off to do this mission. But unfortunately, when the troops landed, there was an enemy force at the camp, but there were no Americans. And a firefight took place, and we didn't lose anyone. Now, the Vietnamese had heavy losses there, because we were trained to fight at night, and this was at night, and we woke them up, and they came out shooting, and we had one man that got hit by an enemy bullet. We got Sergeant Leroy Wright, who was a sergeant on the helicopter that landed there in the compound. He suffered a broken ankle, and those were the only injuries that occurred that night, and there were no deaths. We didn't lose anybody. The 105s, I told you we had some 105s that flying overhead. Okay, we had a loss there. But anyway, when I got word that there were no POWs, I said, extricate the force, bring the force out, but be sure that you account for everyone that went in there. I want everyone to be on those helicopters coming out. And that was done. And so the helicopters were loaded, and people came out. And of course, the one that we left there, we destroyed. One C-130 had already gone and was flying over Laos. The other one stayed there. The last airplane to leave the area was a Combat Talon C-130, and they all come out. But they didn't come out as a formation. They came out all together, all separate. Okay, the 105 that was providing cover got hit by a missile, and he was there, of course, to fight the missile a bit. But he got hit, but there were 5 altogether of those, and that crew had to bail out, and they bailed out over the mountains of Laos. I knew exactly where they bailed out. I had contact with them, and we were able to get a coordinate of where they were. We passed that coordinate to one of our helicopter crews that was waiting to bring out POWs, and of course they didn't have to do that because we didn't have the POWs, and they were able to contact the 2 pilots that landed on the ground who bailed out in the mountains at night. This was about 3 o'clock in the morning. They were able to make contact with them and landed and picked them up and brought them to Udorn, and they had them at Udorn by nighttime, by daylight. And of course the force all came in then. Simons and I got, of course I made a report right away to Washington on what the situation was. And Simons and I got word to come to Washington as quick as we could, because a lot of questions were being asked that we had attacked and destroyed a prison camp. You know, it had aroused problems among the people who heard that gee, maybe some POWs got hurt in doing that. Well, that didn't happen. So we got on a Pan American flight to Washington out of Saigon, and as quickly as we could. We made a stop in Honolulu. We were met in Honolulu by Admiral McCain, and he had canceled our flight from there on to Washington and scheduled his airplane to take us the rest of the way, but he wanted to talk with us. He wanted to know what happened and so forth. Remember, he's got a son who's a POW. And anyway, we had a good visit with him. We had breakfast with him, and we got on his airplane. And before he left, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Don't let anybody tell you that this mission was a failure," because we felt that we had failed in some way, and that we didn't bring any POWs out. But we knew that we had given the message that we were there, so that was good. Anyway, he said, "We will learn as time goes on that a lot of good will have accumulated from having done this." So we moved on, and we got to Washington and got to the Pentagon. Of course, they knew we were coming, and they met us there and they brought us. There was a meeting with the defense people and the chief of staff, the joint staff officers. We had a meeting, and it was decided that we have a meeting with the press. So we had a meeting with the press there in the Pentagon, and then we went to the White House and briefed the president. I think you saw a picture of that up here on the screen. I had the place of honor, I guess, sitting there next to the president, and briefed him on what took place. Simons was there with me. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Moore, was there. Secretary of Defense was there. The advisors, the German fella. Anyway, the president's staff was there also at the president's office.
Yes, sir.
And We thought we'd get some static from the Congress. We didn't. There was some problem. Some people said that it was a foolhardy thing to do, that we had endangered some of our people on this team. And what did we do? We didn't bring any out. Well, and books have been written who have highlighted the fact that we didn't bring any out, and they didn't give enough weight, I don't think, to the fact that it affected the POWs. If we had a POW here, I think he could tell you that it helped the morale of the POWs in that we did this. As far as I'm concerned, it was a success.
Thank you, sir. So we're out of time, sir, unfortunately. Obviously, this story was very abbreviated here. General Manor has many, many stories from his experiences both in World War II, leading up to Vietnam, and then finally with the Sante raid. He's going to be around after this for those who'd like to talk to him. And for just a minute, sir, I'd like to ask any of the special operators in the room who are here to stand up for just a minute from any of the services. Please.
Special ops.
And sir, these are the men and women who have taken the gauntlet from you and leaned forward with what you've done in special operations. And for that, we thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, General Leroy Manor.
I want to thank all of you also. I've been very impressed here to see all of the people in the various schools of the area university, and it makes me feel good that we have what you represent in our U.S. Air Force of this great country. Thanks a lot.